When the last spark of life flashed, the world as he knew it dissolved, giving way to an absolute void. The protagonist, whom we will call Artem, seemed to cease to exist in the usual dimension. There are no angels, no shining light, only boundless space, devoid of time and sounds. It was here, in this seemingly endless vacuum, that he found himself in a state between life and what comes after. At first it seemed to Artem that it was only a terrible dream, a fragment of a forgotten reality. He felt as if he were immersed in an ocean of silence, where there were no touches, no voices. But then, in the depths of that silence, he heard something that could not be mistaken for an accident, a quiet but insistent call. It came from the very core of his being, an echo of ancient wisdom that awakened in him forgotten memories of who he had once been. The call was both affectionate and disturbing, like a reminder that every soul carries something great within it, something that is rooted in the very essence of existence. It beckoned to Artem, awakening within him a sense of inevitable destiny. Suddenly, in the majestic silence, he felt as if an invisible hand was pushing him toward the source of that voice. Artem took an unconscious step forward, and the space around him began to change. The sounds never came, but the very sensation of the presence of something more filled the void. In this changed world, where time seemed to stand still, a figure appeared before him, a tall, mysterious silhouette shrouded in a vague haze. It was the guardian of the threshold, an ancient guide between worlds whose presence was both awe-inspiring and deeply respectful. The guardian did not speak in a loud voice, but every movement he made, every twinkle in his eyes conveyed a message of eternity. His gaze was deep, as if he saw not only Artem's body, but also his soul. An unknown force hovered between them, as if the universe itself was building a bridge between oblivion and awareness. Artem, the guardian said in a shadowy voice, the words sounding like a quiet wind coming from the remotest corners of space. You have a choice to make. You can forget what was, dissolve into the oblivion of this void where no one can achieve anything. Or you can remember everything you have ever carried in your heart and start the path that will lead you to the truth of your existence. These words seemed to pierce through the thickness of reality itself. Artem felt the realization slowly creeping in. His life was not over. It had only taken on a new form. He remembered his lost dreams, his unfulfilled hopes, the pain and joy he had experienced in a world that now seemed both distant and dear. All his memory, all his experience, and every emotion were ready to burst forth like a bright star against the dark sky. Nevertheless, he was faced with a choice that would determine the future of his soul. He had to decide whether to accept the loss of the old world, to leave everything behind, to forget in the endless silence, or to accept the burden of memory, to lift the weight of what he had experienced and begin a new uncharted path. The path of awakening, the path to the realization of his true nature. Artem stood in indecision, his hands trembling and his heart beating as it had never beaten in his entire life. At that moment, all the colors of his soul merged into one. Fear, hope, regret, and determination intertwined in a single impulse. He saw two paths before him, two future scenarios, and realized that not just his personal fate, but the fate of all that he had yet to discover, depended on this choice. The threshold guardian held out her hand, and an elusive spark of light began to glimmer in her palm, barely discernible, like the glow of a morning dawn. This spark heralded the beginning of a great journey, not the end of history, but its most exciting beginning. However, the choice had not yet been made, and Artem had to make this fateful decision himself. At that moment, the space around him seemed to freeze, and time began to obey a new law, the law of the upcoming choice. Artem's soul was on the threshold of a great mystery, and the call coming from the depths of his being continued to pulse quietly but inevitably, reminding him that the journey had just begun. He took a step forward. The world Artyom was in had changed again, and this time drastically. The space seemed to expand, turning into an endless hall where the ceiling was lost in the starry darkness and the walls emitted a soft, silvery glow. The floor was as smooth as the surface of a frozen lake, and light seemed to pulsate slowly beneath its surface like the heart of the universe. Mirrors stretched along both sides of the hall. They were not the same. Some were tall, almost celestial, while others were narrow, like the crevices of memory. Their frames were carved of wood, gold, stone, bone, materials that would not normally be around. Some of the mirrors whispered softly, others were silent, but in each you could feel an invisible, living energy. Artyom did not feel a body, only a presence, but he knew that this was his path, his reflections. He moved along the mirrors, and the first one flashed with light, as if it recognized him. Inside he saw a boy, himself, small, barefoot, standing in the rain at the door of the orphanage. He didn't just see, he felt the dampness of the clothes, the despair in his heart, the loneliness that burned through. But there was another perspective to this memory. He suddenly felt the feelings of the kindergarten teacher who watched him from the window. Her sympathy, her inner pain at her own powerlessness. Emotions he had never known suddenly came upon him like a flood. The next mirror is him as a teenager, the first time he hurt his friend with words spoken in anger. He remembered only the irritation, but now he could feel how the words had pierced his friend's heart, how he had remained silent in his room for a long time afterward, clutching the note with the confession he had never dared to give. Again, another's feelings were becoming his own. Step by step, mirror by mirror, Artyom remembered. But not as we remember, but in full depth, actions, consequences, chains of pain and light he left in other people. There was a strange harmony in the hall. No one here was accusing him, condemning him, or pointing out his mistakes. Everything was part of a single stream. He, his choices, and those who faced them. It was honest knowledge, deep, sometimes brutal, but without judgment. And in that, Artyom found a strange comfort. But now he came to one of the mirrors, an old one, almost blackened by time. Its frame was of black, charred wood, covered with unknown writing. He stopped, and the mirror activated itself. First, there's the emptiness, then a flash, and he saw a city. A city he didn't know, people in clothes alien to his memory, streets he'd never walked. A woman wrapped in scarlet held a child by the hand and shouted, throwing something in his direction. He heard the name, Caleb. Caleb? He felt some deep part of his being respond. Not a name, but a response. It was as if a part of him knew that voice. He stared into the mirror like a portal and didn't recognize any of the scenes. But everything inside him said, you were there, not here, once upon a time. Next, another vision. He is sitting at his desk, writing with a quill pen, his face focused, but his eyes filled with longing. He feels the taste of metal in his mouth, the pain in his chest, and the thought, I should have saved them earlier. Artyom backed away from the mirror. A storm was raging inside. This was not from his life, at least not from the one he remembered. What is it? He whispered. But no one answered. The guard had disappeared. He was here, but now Artyom was walking alone, or not quite alone. It seemed to him as if someone was watching, not from outside, but from inside the mirrors. A soft, wise presence. It didn't interfere, but it was as if it were guiding him. He wanted to turn away, to continue on his way. But the mirror, as if sensing his hesitation, shone with a new light. In it, he saw a woman. Her face was beautiful and sad. She looked straight at him through the glass unblinking, and Artyom suddenly realized she knew him, not as a person, as a soul. Who are you, Bo? He asked mentally, and in response her lips moved, but he didn't hear the words, only a feeling, like an invisible thread reaching to his heart. She had eyes in which he saw stars, but as soon as he took a step closer, the mirror faded into mist. He was left alone, with a dizzying question. What if it wasn't my life, but my other life? He turned around. The hall went on. Endless mirrors waited for him like guardians of secret memories. But now he knew, this journey was more than just a review of one incarnation. He began to suspect. His soul had lived more than one life, and perhaps the most important was just beginning. He walked out of the hall of mirrors without feeling his legs or heaviness. Everything in him had changed. Memory was no longer a linear story, but a sense of a multi-layered, interwoven existence. A silence hummed inside him. Not frightening, but filled with anticipation. He knew the next stage would be harder, not just to see, but to let go. In front of Artyom stretched a space resembling a garden, but it was not a garden in the usual sense. It had no horizons. It did not obey the laws of nature. Flowers grew in the air, the roots of ancient trees were woven into arches, and every leaf sang with the sound of memory. He sensed it at once. It was not plants that lived here, but memories. He took a step, and figures appeared out of nowhere. First, his mother. She stood as he remembered her from the last few days, with tired eyes, with trembling hands, holding a photograph of her and his father. He remembered how they had quarreled in the hospital. He had said then, "You cling to illusions. He's not coming back." And he left. And 2 days later, she was gone. Now seeing her in front of him, he not only remembered, he felt her heart flutter the second his words hit her like a stone. "I didn't mean to," he blurted out. But his mother was already dissolving with a slight smile, as if she'd forgiven him before he could blame himself. Then there's the brother, the one they hadn't spoken to in 7 years. And that woman, the beloved one he'd let go but never forgiven. There were figures, faces, phrases, tears and silences. There were more and more of them. He stood in the very center of his bonds, and each one that appeared was a thread stretched between his heart and the past. Some of the attachments were released easily, with tears, with warm acceptance, others through pain and resistance. But one image did not disappear. She stood off to the side at the back of the garden, a little girl, slim, in a pale dress, her hair gathered in ribbons, her eyes big as a universe in which pain was frozen. Artyom froze. He knew that face. "Sasha," he whispered. The name came out of him on its own, as if it had always been with him. He fell to his knees, not from fatigue, from guilt, because in the dream he'd thought was a nightmare. He'd seen the fire. He remembered the smell of smoke, the screaming, how he'd held her hand and how she'd slipped away. The memory always came back, but he didn't know if it was real or a symbol. He knew now it had happened. Maybe in another life. Maybe in this one, in the part he'd displaced. But he couldn't save her. He reached for her, but the girl backed away, not with hatred, with sadness. "I'm sorry," he said. And then, as if in response, the space shook. A man emerged from the light, tall, his clothes shimmering like oil on water. His face was indistinct, as if the world itself could not fully express his appearance. It was Mentor. "You couldn't save her," he said softly, "because it wasn't your job." Artyom looked up, not understanding. "But I had to. I was there." "Yes, you were, but she chose to leave. And you agreed to it, long before that life. That was your contract. Her death was supposed to make you want to search. Without her, you wouldn't have come here." Artyom's mouth went dry. He wanted to say something, but everything inside him froze at the truth, which slowly but inevitably penetrated to the very core. "Had we agreed on that?" he whispered. Mentor nodded. "Both of you. Her soul is older than it looks. She didn't come to be saved. She came to be your catalyst. You're connected, and you will meet again." Artyom looked at the girl again. She smiled, and for the first time he felt not guilt, but gratitude, deep, humble. He let go, not because he forgot, but because he understood. In that instant, something left his chest. It was as if the knot that had compressed his heart had dissolved into warmth. "One of many bonds," the mentor said, "but perhaps the most important." Artyom stood up. The space around me changed. The garden disappeared. A passageway reopened in front of him. But now it was upwards. He felt it with the skin of his soul. Up, the journey continued. The silence was no longer empty. It was singing, deeply, faintly, like a distant mountain wind blowing through the rocks of millennia. Artyom stood on the threshold of a new reality. The world around him was indescribable. Not light or darkness, not space or nothingness. It was a place between all places, a crossroads of destinies. In front of him, at the point where invisible lines intertwined into a glowing tree, two gates grew. Some were shimmering as if woven from streams of stellar wind. They radiated infinite peace, the call of sublime silence and knowledge. They were the gate of the sublime plan, where souls need no form, where experience is replaced by contemplation, where you become not a participant but a part of meaning. Others were golden amber, warm, breathing like the lungs of the world. They reeked of life, blood and flesh, pain and joy, choice and oblivion. It was the gate of return, to incarnation, to new life. Artyom stood between them, and he realized for the first time his freedom was real. Neither path was right and or wrong. Each was a continuation of the journey, but only one resonated not only in his mind, but in his heart. And then the mentor appeared before him, still in the same inscrutable guise, but now his voice sounded closer. You've traveled down memory lane. You have freed your heart. Now you can choose to return to the flesh to complete the cycle, or go to the plains where there is no time, where you merge with the flow. Artyom was silent for a long time. He already knew, inwardly, that there would be no more ordinary rebirth. If he came back, it would only be with a task, with intention, with fire. And once that realization solidified, the space in front of him began to change. Images of possible lives appeared before him. One is an old wanderer living in a cave in the Himalayas. He is almost silent, but people are drawn to him. He can see the pain in their eyes and speak the one word that changes lives. The other is a young female surgeon. Her hands heal, but that's not the real miracle. She can hear the patient's soul even in a coma, and often recites dreams that no one has ever told. The third is a street musician in a bustling city. He is homeless, but every day in his sounds, someone recognizes something long forgotten, an echo of love, forgiveness, faith. He saw hundreds of faces, hundreds of roads, and in each one a key moment in which he could awaken someone's soul, sometimes with a word, sometimes with silence, sometimes by his presence. And suddenly, among the images, he saw her, a girl, but not a girl anymore, a woman, confident, with a shadow of sadness in her eyes. She was standing by the window, holding a book in her hands, and looking for something. Artyom sensed it was her, the one whose loss he had borne, whose death had been his awakening. Only now, it was a new encounter, a new form, another scene of life. You will cross paths again, Mentor said. You both chose this, to complete the knot not with pain, but with light. Artyom took a step toward the return gate, but stopped. Will I remember all this? He asked. The mentor smiled softly. No, not right away, but you'll feel it. No. Sometimes in dreams, sometimes in the rustle of leaves or the glance of a random passerby. Knowledge doesn't disappear. It just becomes part of you. What if I'm wrong? You're going to make a mistake more than once. But now every mistake is a path to awakening, not oblivion. Because you're not just going for yourself. You're going for them. Artyom was silent, and then a thought sounded in space. Not his, but reflected from him. You will become a mirror, and in that mirror others will see the truth. He inhaled, not the air, but the essence of the movement, and stepped. The gate welcomed him without a sound. Only a slight glow swept across their arch like a heartbeat. And in that instant, as he was disappearing into the new circle of life, the mentor spoke. You're not reborn. You come back, like the spark, like the remembrancer. The darkness was not darkness. It was dense, soft, like the depths of the primordial waters from which worlds are born. There was no fear in it, only expectation, only peace. Artyom was not a body. He wasn't even a soul, in the usual sense in which he had understood it before. He was a light, not blinding, not flashing, but that quiet inner glow that had always existed in him, but hidden behind layers of pain, memory, fear, names. He, the spark of the source. Nothing separated him from everything. He felt every heart, every tear, every thought of every living thing like a breath, not an intrusion, but a belonging. He was part of the source, and the source was in him. And that's when he remembered everything. He remembered how he himself had wanted to leave the oneness, to become an experience, to forget, to return to the truth through the path. He remembered being born again and again into the flesh worlds, in the flesh, in pain, in love, to learn and to teach. He remembered making promises to the souls he had been connected to since the beginning of time, to be with them, to remind them, to awaken them. He saw a chain of incarnations, not linear, but intertwined like the branches of a tree. In some, he was a son, in others, an enemy, in still others, just someone who had passed by but left a word, a look, a touch. But now, in the heart of the source, he realized the most important thing. He had never been separated, and he could never be. And everything he was looking for, salvation, answers, forgiveness, it was all within himself. He is not a mistake. He's not punishment. He is the spark that came into matter to start a fire. A soft glow appeared in the space. The image of Mentor reappeared, but now Artyom saw him not as another. He realized that Mentor had always been a part of his own higher self, his guide, his shadow of light, his knowledge waiting beyond the memory. "You are ready," Mentor said, not in a voice now, but in a silence that echoed in his heart. "Yes," Artyom replied, but now it wasn't just an answer, it was a decision. He'll be back, but not as one who has forgotten, but as one who remembers, not as one who seeks truth, but as one who is its reflection in the world, not as one who fears death, but as one who knows that death is the breath of the source. And the next instant, he felt a breath. The first one. The air burned my lungs, the heart squeezed, skin alive. The world was tangible. He opened his eyes, the dim light of a lamp, white walls, the smell of antiseptic. He's a baby. In the arms of a woman whose face has no name yet, but whose heart beats in unison with his. He hears his father laughing somewhere. He doesn't know the words, but he knows they have been together many times. He does not remember his past name, nor the faces of his mentors, nor the mirrors, nor the gates. But the silence has stayed with him. The silence is not empty, but like a call. He feels it every time he looks up into the sky, or when he hears someone crying, or when he draws incomprehensible symbols in his school notebook, not knowing what they mean. He's a child. But somewhere in him, there's already a memory, silent, invisible. The memory of the path, the memory that he is the spark, that he came back to shine. And when many years later he happens to meet a girl at the train station, and she smiles as if she has known him forever, knowledge will flash inside him. He'll recognize her, and will realize the journey continues, but he is no longer lost. He is the guide. End of story. But not the end of the journey, because every soul is a spark, and every spark is looking for a way home.